In the opening scene, we see Peter sleeping in his room when he suddenly hears a strange noise coming from the wall. He thinks it's nothing serious, so he goes back to sleep. However, the sound becomes louder, and Peter wakes up again. As the sound continues, Peter gets up from his bed and turns on the lights. He stares at the wall where the sound is coming from. Peter, still curious about the source of the sound, he approaches the wall and gives it a firm knock. Surprisingly, he hears a similar bang from the wall in return. He enters his parents' room and wakes his mother Carol and tells her that he's hearing sounds coming from the wall. As Peter seems terrified, Carol goes with him into his room to check what's possibly wrong, but she doesn't hear anything. She just tells Peter that since their house is old, it's likely for him to hear sounds from the wall. In their school classroom, the principal introduces a new substitute teacher named Miss Devine, who will now be in charge of the class. Despite all his classmates already out to recess, Miss Devine looks concerned when Peter stays back, likely fearing to get bullied. As she speaks to him, Peter suddenly gets startled by a spider on his table. Fortunately, Miss Devine helps him get rid of it. When Peter arrives home that day, he approaches his parents and requests permission to dress up for Halloween. He wants to have the same experience as the other children in his school. Peter's mother appears unhappy with the question and sternly tells him not to even consider it. Mark, feeling disheartened by Carol's response, decides to share a story with Peter. The story is about a girl who disappeared on Halloween in their neighborhood a few years ago. Peter is scared by this, but Carol and Mark assure him that they will make sure he doesn't go missing. During the night, as Peter sleeps, he is startled to hear a voice calling his name from the wall. This fills him with intense fear, causing him to yell for Mark to hurry over. As Mark walked into the room, Peter informed him that he had heard something once more. Mark appears to be skeptical as he informs Peter that he has quite an imaginative mind. According to Mark, if there is anything present, it would be rats, but he has a solution to handle them. Then they put poison that smells like cinnamon. Peter is sad to know that the rats will die. Then Mark mentions that they might be making sounds that keeps him from sleeping. The next day, Miss Devine sees Peter drawing something quite troubling, became concerned about this, and later that day, she goes to Peter's house. Miss Devine inquires about Peter's well-being, to which Carol reassures that there is nothing amiss with him. Afterwards, she presents the drawing to Carol, who then dismisses it as nothing serious. According to Carol, Peter's overactive imagination can lead him to do some pretty wild things. Once Miss Devine leaves, Carol brings the drawing to Peter to ask for an explanation. According to Peter, it's simply a drawing, but Carol interprets it as Peter seeking for help from a stranger. Once again, Peter heard the voice from the wall that night. The voice seems to be coming from a young girl, and she simply wants to have a conversation and be friends with Peter. Peter said that he was only envisioning her voice. On the other hand, the girl insists that she is genuine and offers to stop attempting to communicate with Peter if he doesn't want a friend and would rather be left alone. Peter is experiencing guilt for his harsh tone and is open to forming a friendship with whomever it may be. The following day, Peter is at school painting his pumpkin when Miss Devine approaches him to praise his work. She whispers him that his painting is her top pick, while Brian seems jealous. Then Brian decides to bully Peter. While at it, he also smashes Peter's pumpkin. Upon returning home, Peter's expression turns somber and tears start rolling down his cheeks while in his room. In that moment of need, the voice from the wall reaches out to him, offering comfort and friendship. As Peter is telling her about Brian, the voice suddenly starts giving him some really awful advice on how he should confront Brian. The following day at school, Brian shows up with a poorly painted pumpkin as a way to apologize to Peter. Peter remembers the advice and decides to follow Brian, pushing him down the stairs. Brian suffers a serious fall, resulting in a broken leg. Mark is furious with Peter at home. He informs him that their family does not resort to violence to solve their problems. Peter attempts to build a defense for himself by stating that he had no intention of causing harm to Brian. At that moment, Carol brought up the drawing that prompted Miss Devine to come visit them. Mark is confused as to why he is only finding out about it now, and this is only adding to his anger. After being told by Peter that he's grounded, Mark retorts to Carol that since he's so seriously grounded, he should go to the basement instead of his room. Mark pulls the refrigerator aside and there happens to be a door. He opens it and Peter is led down the stairs and then asked to sit on the floor. When Mark returns and locks the door, Peter calls out a voice, but he receives no answer, causing him to cry. Miss Devine is approached by the school principal later in the day, who has been informed about her visit to Peter's house. Miss Devine claims that she went only because she believed Peter needed assistance. He advises her not to become too involved in the personal lives of students, as it can have negative consequences. Nevertheless, Miss Devine informs the principal that there is something peculiar about Carol. The principal explained that her behavior may seem unusual or overly cautious due to a child going missing in their neighborhood on Halloween. The next day, while grading her students' math tests, Miss Devine sees Peter's test paper and writes her phone number at the top of it. The latter then goes to Peter's house again. Mark requests that Miss Devine to come in, and she complies. As she entered, Mark greeted her while holding a hammer in his hand. Upon receiving a cup of water from him, Miss Devine notices that Mark is bleeding. According to Mark, it's not a big deal and he probably got hurt while working on some home renovations. Miss Devine inquired once more about Peter, asking about his current school arrangements. According to Mark, Peter will now receive homeschooling from Carol, who has prior experience as a teacher. While in conversation with Carol and Mark, Peter overhears Miss Devine's presence. He begins to yell for assistance and creates loud banging sounds in order to alert Miss Devine. Nonetheless, the noise coming from the washing machine is too disruptive for anyone to hear him. Out of nowhere, Miss Devine announces that she wants to leave. Walking towards the door, she hears the banging in the basement, only after the washing machine finally stops. Upon hearing the noise, she quickly turns to ask what is making the sound, and Mark informs her that it's the washing machine. Then we see Carol bring some cookies to Peter, and frees Peter from the basement. In his room, he approaches the wall again and asks the voice to kindly engage in a conversation with him. The voice replies to him and begins revealing that his parents are not who they seem to be. Peter expresses his desire to see her, but she insists that she looks very different and is afraid that he will get scared and shout. Peter says he won't do that, and then the voice asks him to remove a part of the wallpaper from the wall where the voice is coming from. There is a small hole in that part, and from there, Peter can look through to see who it is. Peter is terrified by the strange appearance of the one eye. She reveals, he simply cannot believe how peculiar it looks. He backs away and asks her who she is, to which the girl responds that she is his sister. She informs him that their parents trapped her in that place and warns him that they are wicked individuals who will also imprison him soon. The girl responds to Peter's fear by telling him that he needs to be scared in order to find the courage to free her. His sister claims that she has been waiting for him to grow big enough to move the clock in the living room, which is blocking the door to where she is locked. Feeling overwhelmed, Peter decides to go to bed scared. That evening, he had a horrifying nightmare in which his parents appeared as monstrous beings. Upon awakening, Carol is by his side, offering him comfort. She inquires about what he saw in the nightmare, but Peter claims he cannot recall. Peter goes to the backyard in the morning. After some digging, he uncovers a human skull buried in the ground. When Peter gets back to his room, the voice reveals that the skull is from a trick or treater whom their parents had killed when she asked the person for help. Peter says he now understands how she feels, and he's going to do everything to get help and get her out of there. The voice asks where he's going to get help, and Peter brings out his test paper and says he knows just who to call. He sneaks into his parents' room and dials Miss Devine's number. When she answers the phone, he explains that he needs help. Just as he begins to speak, Carol locates him and takes the phone out of his hand. Afterwards, she talks to Miss Devine and explains that Peter just wanted to greet her because he misses his teacher. Additionally, Carol notes that Peter was unable to carry on the conversation due to his shyness. Miss Devine is skeptical because she is certain that something is amiss. Carol storms into Peter's room, seething with anger over his actions. Noticing the removed wallpaper and the hole in the wall, her expression turns to one of sudden terror and she is visibly shaken as she exits Peter's room. Carol then asks Peter what the girl has said to him, but Peter doesn't say anything. Carol says it doesn't matter and that whatever happens now will be his fault, because she will tell Mark when he gets home. That night, Mark and Carol discuss what happened and what steps to take next. Meanwhile, The voice urgently informs Peter that they must take action quickly before his parents harm them. Peter later goes down to listen in on his parents' conversation. Seeing him, they watch as he runs into his room. Mark heads to Peter's room and informs him that they have something to take care of in the garden the following day. The next day, Mark brings Peter to the backyard and points out some of the pumpkins in the garden that have been infected. He informs Peter that in order to protect the uninfected, they need to eliminate the infected individuals. He then compels Peter to begin digging. As the family sat down for dinner that night, a trick-or-treater rang the doorbell, but Carol shouted at the child to go away. Despite Mark's urging, Peter still refuses to eat his food. While Mark is eating, he realizes that the soup has a different taste and asks Carol if she used a new recipe. After taking a few spoons, Carol notices that the taste is not the same. While Carol tries to discern what makes the soup unique, Mark notices that it has a hint of cinnamon aroma. All of a sudden, Mark comes to the realization that Peter has poisoned them with rat poison. He immediately tells Carol to call 911, after which he starts asking Peter if he did anything. Carol finds out that the landline's wire has been cut. Mark begins to vomit a black fluid before collapsing to the ground and passing away. Upon witnessing this, Carol seizes a knife and begins to pursue Peter. The moment she catches him, the poison takes effect, causing her to vomit and then fall down the stairs, leading to her death. Peter goes up to his room, and it appears that the girl behind the wall had given him the idea to do all that he did. She then asks Peter to get the keys to the door and free her. Peter takes the key and manages to open the door to where his sister is. In contrast, the girl's voice suddenly transforms, and she begins to laugh in an odd manner, causing Peter to quickly run and hide in his room. Coincidentally, Brian and his brothers happen to arrive at the house at the same time. She then let Brian and his brothers come into the house. All of a sudden, she transforms into a monstrous figure with incredibly long hair, and she ruthlessly eliminates them, one by one. Miss Devine is troubled by the call from Peter and decides to go to his house to check on him. At the house, Peter's sister is now alone with him. He's hiding and hears her talking about being born a monster and how their parents have always hated her. She also takes ownership of the disappearance of the young girl from the neighborhood. His sister also mentions that she has been spending the time in her cage preparing for when she would be freed by him. Shortly after, she finds Peter and locks him in her cage. Upon arrival, Miss Devine goes to the house and enters when no one responds to the door. Peter hears Devine when she calls his name. Without hesitation, he yells at her to go, but she can't comprehend the reason for him being trapped in the basement, with lifeless bodies scattered throughout the house. Suddenly, Peter's sister appears and starts moving towards the room, but just as Miss Devine hears the sound, she quickly locks the door. Peter informs Miss Devine that the monster is actually his sister. As the creature makes its way towards the basement, Miss Devine smashes the wall in order to rescue Peter. As the two of them flee the house, the monster manages to grab Peter just as Miss Devine runs out. She locks Peter in a tight cage and goes down there to talk to him about how she has always been treated unfairly by their parents. At that moment, Miss Devine re-enters the room, and the monster resolves to finally eliminate her. The monster manages to injure Miss Devine quickly, but as she's about to kill the teacher, Peter pulls the monster's long hair from inside his cage. After using it as a rope to escape the cage, he takes advantage of the monster's weakness and pain from the hair pull, and Miss Devine begins to physically assault it. Despite their efforts, the monster remains unfazed, prompting Miss Devine and Peter to push it into the cage and secure the lock. Just as they are ready to leave, the monster begins to warn Peter about the consequences of leaving. She insists that Peter is just like her, emphasizing that he is the one who killed their parents. Peter angrily yells and asserts that they have nothing in common. The monster then says the cage is not enough to keep her down there. In addition, she mentions that Peter will encounter her no matter where he goes, and she will continuously be close by.